I'm Tamara, and today I am going to share with you my top 5 favorite quilting podcasts that I listen to on the regular. Now, I know the words quilting and podcast put together might sound a bit boring, but I promise you it is the exact opposite. So I have 5 that I will share with you, and then after that I have 2 more that I want to share with you that aren't quilting podcasts per se, but I believe that you could enjoy them as well because they do fit in that sewing realm. So let's jump on in. If you have any podcasts that I don't mention today, please leave them in the comments down below and we can create a nice little reference place for us to go to find new, fun, crafty podcasts. Podcast number 1 is called The Quilter on Fire, and it is by Brandy Maslowski. She is a fellow Canadian, which I love, and she started her podcast in 2020, and she posts consistently every Tuesday, which is awesome to find a podcast that has a weekly podcast. I love that. The audio quality is a 5-star. I love it. She's doing a great job there, but there is no video portion to this podcast. The podcast style is an interview format where Brandy is always interviewing one guest. She has some amazing guests on there. I am not deep in the world of quilting, so I don't know all of these famous quilter names out there, but Brandy seems to, and she brings them all into the podcast, and I just love hearing from such knowledgeable people about their craft. And I think that the secret sauce to Brandy's podcast is that it's a very professional interview style, but she still gets to the heart of the story, and it's still almost like a biography style interview. So you get to hear about this person's life and how they learned how to quilt and how they got to where they are in the quilting world, which I think is just fantastic. Now, podcast number 2 is called Quilt Buzz. This is probably the first podcast that I stumbled upon, and I just love it. It is hosted by 2 women. The first is Amanda Kari and then Wendy Chow. Now, both are American, but I believe Wendy comes from Australia originally. They started their podcast in 2020 and they post an average of twice a month on Wednesdays. There is no video version of this podcast, and I would give the audio a 4 out of 5 stars. At the very beginning, if you go back to listen to their earliest stuff, the audio was not the best. And so I really have to give them credit because they have upped their game on their audio and it is so much better and it makes for a really nice listening experience. Now, their content is also an interview format, except that they, for the most part, are interviewing people off of Instagram. So I think that that's a great way to find people to talk to because it seems like it's a whole new world of quilters. And so every time I listen to their podcast, I meet someone new that I can hunt down on Instagram and see all the juicy goodness of their photos and really get to know these people even further, which I very much enjoy. I would say that the secret sauce to this podcast is that you really feel like you're sitting at a kitchen table with a bunch of friends and you're just talking about the thing that you love most. There's a lot of laughter in this particular podcast, and I think that they do a great job of interviewing, but adding a ton of humor in there and just casual conversation. All right, so podcast number 3 is called a Quilting Life podcast, and it is hosted by a mother and daughter, and I believe it's actually produced by the son/brother. So it is by Sherry McConnell and Chelsea Stratton, produced by Chelsea's brother Billy, or I guess Sherry's son Billy. They're American and they started their podcast in 2022 and they post on the 2nd and the 4th Mondays of the month. And I believe if there's a 5th Monday in that particular month, then they do a bit of a Q&A podcast, which is kind of fun too because they take questions from the listeners. There is a video version and an audio version for this podcast. podcast, which I think is fantastic. The audio, I am going to give a 5 out of 5 stars. They're doing a great job there. And because there's a video version, when they're talking about the different fabric lines that they've created or the different quilts and patterns that they've come up with, you can see it because they hang it on the wall behind them within the conversation, which I just think is a great added touch. But if you are listening to this podcast and you're not watching the video, you aren't missing anything. It's still a great podcast to listen to just via audio as well. Now, this really isn't an interview style podcast. It's something different where the mom and the daughter will often talk about their different fabric lines, what they're working on next, different quilts that they're working on, and sometimes they'll talk with Billy as well. And it's just a really enjoyable family conversation. And I think that that's their secret sauce. You just feel like you're a part of the family and you're just enjoying the conversation and you get to hear what they're working on next. And that's always exciting to hear what other people are doing. And I really do believe that it's the family environment that is their secret sauce. All right, you guys, we're getting close to my very favorite podcast. But first, I'm going to share with you number 4, which is also a good podcast. And it's called Karen's Quilting Circle. It's by Karen Brown, who has her own YouTube channel here on YouTube called Just Get It Done Quilts. She's very popular on YouTube. I'm sure you have heard of her before. Karen started her podcast back in 2020 and she posts about 2 a month. However, she has had her YouTube channel for much, much longer. Now, Karen's podcast is video format only, and you can only find it on her YouTube channel. If that changes, please let me know in the comments down below. But as far as her audio goes, I definitely give it a 5 out of 5 stars, and her video quality is just as good. Karen's podcasts are an interview format where it's similar to Brandy from the Quilting on Fire, the first podcast I shared with you, and she'll interview with one person at a time. But the secret sauce to Karen's podcasts is that she is more knowledge-based. So you still get the biography of the person, and there's definitely still that enjoyable, heartwarming back and forth conversation. But she interviews people who are specific in their knowledge. So whether it's based in threads or batting or different techniques. And they get into the nitty-gritty of that, which I definitely enjoy because I love to learn all about these new things that I have yet to hear of. So I would say that that is Karen's secret sauce. And number 5 is my all-time favorite quilting podcast. It is called The Inappropriate Quilters, and it is hosted by Leslie and Rochelle. They are, what I can tell, very good friends, and it is just a conversation between the two of them. Now, they started this podcast in 2022, so it is a very new podcast. And they post mostly on Saturdays, so semi-weekly on Saturdays. There is no video version to this podcast yet, and as far as the audio goes, I am going to give Leslie a 5-star and Rochelle a 4-star. Rochelle, you know why? It is because you like to lean back away from the mic, and so it makes it a little hard to hear you. But I love both of these women so much. They have such great conversations. I love their laughter. They are hilarious. And they have so much quilting knowledge that they just throw in and amongst their conversations, which I would say that is their secret sauce. You get to listen to a fabulous conversation between two friends who share the same love of quilting that you do. And even though they call themselves the Inappropriate Quilters, they're very clean content. We are almost there. I've got 2 more podcasts for you, and then you can check out the description down below where I will have them all linked for easy access. This podcast is called So and So. And it is hosted by Meg, who I think works for Bernina, because essentially it is a Bernina sewing machine company podcast. They started this podcast in 2021, and they post twice a month on Thursdays. They do not have a video version, but their audio is 5 out of 5. It is back to an interview style, one-on-one. So Meg interviews a new sewist every time, not new to sewing, but some amazing people that I have never heard of, and some I have, like my friend Suki Sews. She was interviewed on there recently. But what I like about this particular podcast is they pull people in from all over that I have not heard of. This last podcast I was listening to, they were talking to a woman who sews wedding dresses now for a living. And you really get to hear, again, their biography, how they got started, how they got into the world of sewing, what type of items that they sew. So it might not be quilting related, but it is still a really enjoyable podcast to listen to. And I'd say their secret sauce is all the different varieties of sewists that they pull in to interview. The next podcast is called From Craft to Career. It is hosted by Elizabeth Chappell. Now, she started this podcast in 2021 and she posts weekly every Friday. And I love a podcast that gives me content every single week. I'm always looking forward to it. There is no video version to her podcast. However, I would give her audio a 4 out of 5. And honestly, most days I'd give it a 5 out of 5. Just every now and again, you can either hear, I don't know if she's rubbing her hands together or rubbing a piece of paper, and it just drives me a little bit crazy. But it is an interview format most times. Sometimes it's just Elizabeth, and I gotta give her credit to just be able to talk for 30 minutes and give you valuable content. That is top notch. But sometimes she'll be interviewing different people and how they are running their business. She'll ask them specifics. So if someone knows the ins and outs of how to get a sewing book out there, or how to start pattern writing, or how to market yourself, she goes through all of the business side to crafts, especially around quilting. And that is her secret sauce. She loves business even more than quilting. She is incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to the subject. So if you're interested on that side of the quilting world, then definitely check out her podcast. And as I said at the beginning of this video, if you have a podcast that I did not mention, please leave me a comment down below. I would love to hear what your favorite podcasts are. I am always looking for a new good podcast. Please hit that subscribe button if you want beginner sewing tutorials, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.